These testimonials are representative of my or our experiences, but the exact results and experience will be unique and individual to each person. The information provided herein is not medical advice and is not intended to substitute for the advice of your personal physician or other healthcare providers. Welcome to The Beautiful Bag. This is your host, Leanne Hayden, cancer survivor, and more importantly, ostomy lifer. Each and every week, I'm going to be bringing a special guest or some inspiration for you and a few little stories along the way so that you can learn what life is like for us to be living in an ostomy and why we all think it's a beautiful bag. So listen in and let's get started. This week, I've partnered with Hollister Incorporated to create an informative video that is dear to my heart: how to manage our emotions. In this video, I discuss the ups and downs and give you practical tips to help you. No matter what, this community has your back, and we are all here for you. You can watch it on Hollister's YouTube channel, and I will include the link in the show notes below. So here we go. Let's get to our episode this week. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's The Beautiful Bag podcast. I have a special guest. Her name is Tina. She goes by Own Your Crohn's on Instagram. See, I was going to attempt to say her last name, but I know I'll completely butcher it. So she's going to have to say it for you. But Tina, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Leanne, for having me. My name is Tina Swani Om Prakash. And as Leanne just said, I'm on Instagram as Own Your Crohn's. I also run a nonprofit called South Asian IBD Alliance. Thanks so much for having me here today.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you. We really, really are. And, you know, I love what you have been doing for the community for years, IBD world, the Crohn's world, and all of that too, and the ostomy community. And I know you have so much to share. But why don't we get started so that people know, how and why and when did you end up in your ostomy? And let's get started with your story.
Absolutely. So I was diagnosed with, it was actually ulcerative colitis about 17 and a half years ago in January 2006. And my disease went quickly from mild to severe over the next 2 years. And I was told, there weren't many biological therapies out back then. And I had tried one biologic, but there were a lot of delays, a lot of challenges with cultural stigma in my community and taking all these advanced therapies. I wanted to sort of share that that's how I ended up with an ostomy. Is the biological therapies, the advanced therapies didn't work. When I tried them, it was perhaps too late. I was perhaps too sick. And I was offered surgery then as a next course of treatment. And I was terrified because I was 24 years old. And, I was told at the time that, I can have a J pouch made, fashioned out of my small intestine since I had ulcerative colitis and no indication of Crohn's disease. So no indication of small bowel disease. It was mostly just limited to the colon and rectum. Unfortunately, I do have Crohn's disease. That J pouch did not work out. So what really happened over that time was I had a temporary ostomy, and then, a temporary end, then a loop. And, they ultimately gave me a J pouch. The J pouch was not working out from the very beginning. I already developed pouchitis. They just weren't sure if it was Crohn's or not. They thought it was more bacteria related, could be treated with antibiotics. We tried that for a while. Then we tried biologics again. There were some new biologics out on the market. So I tried all of that. Nothing really worked. And I developed something called a fistula. And it was a really harrowing part of my journey because these fistulae were rectovaginal for the most part for me, or perianal. Now, what does that mean? So a fistula is a tunnel that, when there's a lot of inflammation in the intestine, it can burrow holes into other organs or out onto the skin. So I developed these tunnels, so to speak, from the rectum to vagina or out onto the skin, the anus. And as a young woman in her late 20s, that was a really tough thing to digest, literally. And I was talking to my GI, I was like, just give me back the ostomy. I can't live like this. This is horrible. Um, there have been a lot of cultural taboos, Leanne, that I do want to mention with not just with modern medicine, but with the ostomy bag that are very, very challenging. And I do want to make sure I highlight that today in our conversation for our listeners, because, there are so many taboos in our American or Western world with having an ostomy. Nobody wants an ostomy, but um, I think that in certain races, ethnicities, certain cultures, it becomes to the point where you can't get married, or you're being told you can't enter the temple because you're impure, or you're being told that, don't go in the kitchen because you're impure. It's sort of equated with having your period. And even during your period, you're really not allowed to do prayer in the temple and all of that. So, this is being that this is a permanent ileostomy. I really had to think a lot about all these forms of quote unquote discrimination, because that's what it really is. It's hard to just go ahead. Sorry.
No, no, no. I don't want to interrupt, but that has to be, one thing is you are mentally going through a lot, going through having an illness, having an ostomy in itself, regardless of the rest. I mean, that must have been so difficult, or that must be so difficult, because you said it's culture, it's the way that it is in certain cultures. Um, how has that been on you mentally to get through all of that? I really want to talk about that.
No, absolutely. I'll be honest, Leanne, like I almost didn't go through with the J pouch surgery because I actually preferred the ostomy, but my mom said to me and my family said to me, look, that gentleman that you're dating, he's probably not going to marry you with an ostomy. And because that's how disgusting it's considered in my culture. And to be very honest, a lot of his family told him to seriously reconsider marrying me, because it's just so, this is just how it is. It's so ingrained, and to change that kind of thinking, people with conditions like ours at a young age, it puts pressure on the family because they're like, marriage and having kids is everything. And if you can't get married and have kids, it's ruining the family's reputation. These sound like ancient beliefs, but they're not. Like, this is very much how certain communities of color run currently still, even though we might be living in the United States or in the UK. And you can't even put blame on that, because that's just the way we've been brought up and culturally conditioned. And it's a matter of sort of changing that mindset and saying, look, okay, so I poop in a bag. I'm just like everyone else. I poop just like you do. So what if there's a bag involved? And I think that's one of the reasons why I started my advocacy work, is really like I felt like there was just so much shame, blame, stigma. And I was like, there's a whole layer of issues not being discussed. And I was like, we have to herald change. Mentally, it was so draining for me, Leanne. I got my first ileostomy in 2008, on the 4th of July. I say my very own Independence Day oftentimes. And it was an emergency. I didn't actually start sharing my story until 2018. So 10 years later, publicly. So 12 years since my diagnosis, I lived in shame and silence. Even if I attended support groups, I wouldn't speak. it was just so heavy for me. I did not realize what had happened to me. And I think in therapy and going to these support groups, I started to realize, oh my God, like there's a whole layer that's not being discussed. But also while I relate to a lot of the women maybe in the support groups, they have loving partners who haven't judged them for having an ostomy or having IBD or whatever condition. And that, Tina, you don't have to take on this kind of conditioning, that you can break through that. And I think that's where Own Your Crohn's really came from, is we have to empower ourselves to see beyond some of these stigmas and some of the shame and blame and guilt that gets put on us. And that's why I do a lot of the work that I do. When I started my blog in 2018, Leanne, it exploded right away. And yes, it's a representation thing. Yes, it's a health equity thing, but it's almost like I was talking about some of the issues that people around the world were living with in shame and in silence. And so immediately it blew up. And it wasn't just from South Asia, it was from the Middle East, it was from Africa, and even from Latin America and the Far East, from Korea and Japan. I started getting messages saying, a lot of this kind of conditioning is built into our cultures. I don't know how to break through, and I don't even know if I want to break through. It's no pressure to anyone. As long as you are in a good space mentally, and have accepted the condition, and have accepted life with an ostomy, I think that's what's most important, Leanne, whether you're public about your disease or not. For me, it was really important to be public about this. And I often use the phrase social suicide because it was. A lot of my family till this day, and even extended circles, don't acknowledge my illness or my ostomy because it's just too shameful to talk about. And my patient advocacy work, even though I'm so public, it's just not brought up in conversation. We talk about anything but Tina.
Anything but what you've been through, right? Everything of what you have an ostomy. It's not who you are. Right? So you are still Tina. So, that's a lot. That's a lot of pressure, and that's a lot of work. And you know what? I never realized, you just brought something to me that I never realized how different it was in different cultures, because I've been to Honduras, and Honduras isn't that kind of a culture. But where the doctors have me talk to the villagers about being in an ostomy. And I do, I just stand in the village, and I don't really show, I don't take my whole ostomy out, but I kind of hold the top of the bag at the top of my pants just to explain. And I think speaking about it, how do we break through that culture? How do we change the dynamics? Because what's the choice? You just suffer in silence with a disease, or let it take you over and then you leave this earth? What are the options?
Oh, that's a great question. And that's literally what happened to my dad. And I didn't want it to happen to me. My dad passed away from Crohn's turned colorectal cancer when he was my age, 39. I know. I get the shivers too.
I just got the shivers knowing that his life could be different. He could still be around if it wasn't a cultural thing. Okay. So Tina, keep going. Cause keep going.
It's so seeing that when I was 8 years old, and seeing how much ostomies and ostomy surgery has changed over the years in the last 30 some odd years is also like mind-blowing in my mind. It wasn't just my dad who passed away from this. My aunt in New Delhi, his sister, also had an ileostomy, and passed away from Crohn's turned CRC in her early 40s. So I'm putting out there that this is very personal to me, and I felt like it was some kind of generational curse that I had to break. that if my father and my aunt went through this and I was going through this too, I'm not going to sit around and live in shame and silence. If I have survived and they have not, I felt like it was my duty to proliferate good information about what ostomies are and how life-saving they can be.
Exactly, Tina. And you are doing that. I mean, you are doing that. You said you created the blog in 2018 and it exploded. I went on there and I'm like, I can't believe the amount of information that you have been putting out there to bring that awareness to help people to accept, what life is like. So, so you said earlier it took you 10 years to even talk about it. What did you do during those 10 years?
It's a great question. So I got my ileostomy in 2008. I had a J pouch for 6 of those years. I was diverted for part of that time too and given, loop ileostomy. This is my 4th ostomy that I have now, my 4th stoma rather. And so there was a time that I lived with a J pouch. I actually got married with the J pouch because there was that cultural pressure. And when the J pouch started to fail, and when I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease and that diagnosis was changed, this was back in 2011. So about 5 years into my journey, 3 years into my, experience with an ostomy, I started begging for an ostomy again. I was diverted in 2012 because of the fistulae. That didn't work out. I started to develop more fistulae in the J pouch. The J pouch was just becoming so dysfunctional and diseased. In late 2014, I had the J pouch removed and my ostomy became permanent. This was December 2014.
And how did that go with the marriage? Like, so how did that go with, you're married now, your husband, how did that go,
Yeah.
and the culture and, your whole family?
Yeah, it was really challenging. I think my mom saw me turn around in 2008 from the dead, literally, from being 85 pounds and starting to regain weight, not needing PICC lines to feed me anymore. And she saw that my ostomy wasn't leaking constantly. Yeah, it was leaking in the beginning, but quickly got over that. She was against that surgery. And once I had that 3, 4 months in, she was like, wow, this is so much better than what your dad's situation looked like. You're actually eating again, and you're not bleeding all the time, and you're not throwing up all the time. My husband, then boyfriend, was also seeing this. They saw me at my worst. They saw me completely disabled. The hair on my head was graying at 24 from just malnourishment. Even the hair on my legs, let me be real, like was graying from malnourishment. They knew I was dying. I lost my period, and I lost 50 pounds. Like it was so bad. And the turnaround was so dramatic in late 2008, early 2009. With between the weight gain, less fatigue, not bleeding all the time, and being able to do fun things again, go out with my friends again and swim and do all these things that I thought I was gonna die. And so did my family. I think that radical transformation made them realize, oh my God, okay, so this is not as bad as we thought it was. As far as my marriage goes, I did get married with a J pouch. I did go ahead with the J pouch very reluctantly, because I did believe and buy into sort of that cultural conditioning. And everybody told me, just go and get the J pouch. It's going to be fine. You're going to be cured. I even had an Asian surgeon at the time who said, don't worry, you're going to be fine. And he got some of the cultural issues and still said it was going to be fine. So I went through with it. When that needed to be sort of reversed or diverted, and I was diagnosed with Crohn's, I remember my husband crying for the first time. He was just like, I thought we were past this. And when I started developing fistulae, it started affecting our sex life. And that's something I do want to bring up here today because nobody wants to talk about these things. These are rectovaginal or perianal fistulae. They're going to affect your intimacy. No matter what people say, they will. I developed UTI after UTI. I was afraid of infecting him in any type of way because literally I had mucus, blood, feces passing through into my vagina. These are things nobody wants to talk about. It's disgusting. I understand all of that. I've lived with it. And I've had 5 rectovaginal fistulae and, several others in other locations. And I think we really need to sort of understand people. And I saw this posted in a support group that I run recently, the pros and cons of getting an ostomy. And somebody was like, well, it's going to affect my sex life. I'm like, how many fistulae do you have? And
Right?
isn't that affecting your sex life?
Exactly. That's totally affecting your sex. Like
So,
you can't right. It's so crazy that my ostomy has not affected my sex life at all. I'm just fold it over and move it out of the way, whatever. I mean, there's ways to do it. Yes. You go in, you take care of things. So it can be more comfortable, a little more sexy, but you still can have that amazing sex life you had before with your ostomy. But like you said, you were going through all this with your fistulas and everything else. So, and you're right, people don't talk about it. They don't talk about their sex life at all.
And so I want to make a point to highlight that fistulae, especially in that region, whether you're a man or a woman or whatever gender you might be, are going to affect your sex life. Having an ostomy may not affect your sex life. In fact, I have thrived, with my ostomy, and you do get your libido back because with active disease, it can affect your libido. It can come roaring back once you start feeling better after surgery. So that is a point that I wanted to make sure I emphasize is we think that an ostomy is going to totally affect our sex life. Have that conversation with your physician. Obviously, this depends on the location of your disease, your gender, all of these things. But honestly, truly, for me, and it sounds like you, Leanne, my sex life has only improved because of it. So I would just put that out there as well. And there's so many things that you can do, right? You can wear ostomy wraps. You can wear stealth belts. There's so many products out there nowadays where you can sort of either cover it up or not. It's totally up to you. You just move it out of the way, or like people ask me sometimes in private how I deal with it, and I'm like, just empty your bag before you get intimate. If you're afraid that it's going to burst or something, just empty it. You can put on a wrap. They have all these cool wraps like Foxy wrap, Vixen wrap. They have all
Right?
these
The crazy
cool
names they come up with. Hey, you go to Victoria's Secrets, their names are like that too. So you're right. And it's a wrap and it's just there. It's a piece of clothing. Or like you said, just make sure you empty it, fold it over. Does that take away that, that spontaneity a little bit? Maybe, but maybe not, because it depends on where you are. I mean, and you said something too. It's like your libido changes, right? When you have a disease, but your libido changes as you age, as you've been with a partner for a while too. I mean, menopause changes your libido. Age changes your libido. I mean, anything can happen.
Anything changes your libido. Like depression changes your libido.
Exactly. Drink a little too much wine and some things might not happen.
Exactly.
So good.
Exactly. No, I'd rather have my health and have those fistulae gone and be in remission rather than not choosing an ostomy. And that's something that I really want to make clear today is I have seen so many people in my community and in other communities, community agnostic, okay, say, I would rather live, with a fistula and setons placed in my vagina than an ostomy. And I'm like, okay, I respect your decision, but you have not seen the other side. Having my J pouch removed, while it was complicated, I needed a lot of corrective surgeries. I still developed a fistula. I'm on an advanced therapy now that is finally controlling my disease, a newer one. but I live with my ostomy. And I will tell you, my quality of life was, I was equivalent to The Walking Dead 10 years ago, 8 years ago. I was equivalent to The Walking Dead. Have I had flare-ups of disease here and there? Yes. Have I had other diseases pop up over the years? Sure. But in all of these processes, I have to admit my ostomy has made things easier. And why do I say that? I've needed corrective surgery for my Crohn's disease. I've needed to have adhesions removed, blockages removed. Every single time, I feel that if I had been connected and had to go through all of those bowel preps, having to poop again after surgery, my ostomy just does it. I don't have to think about it. It just does it. Like, I don't have to like sit there on a toilet, deal with fissures, deal with fistulae. Like, it's one of those things, Leanne, like it's made my life infinitely easier. People are like, okay, what are the downsides? After surgery, especially, you need to figure out a rhythm. Every stoma is a little bit different. Your skin changes. There's grooves now on your belly from like having all these surgeries. The pouching process can change. You might need, different rings to support it, maybe some convexity to prevent leaks. It's the leaks that can get a little bit tricky at times, but they're not a permanent situation. You might be dealing with issues for a few weeks or a month. And I mean, I had a surgery less than 2 years ago, and I dealt with leaks for a few months. But it wasn't like it didn't happen every day. It might have happened once a week. And it wouldn't be like an explosion. I might just see, oh, there's some itching over here. Okay, I see a little bit of a leak starting to spring. Let me take care of it. It's not always an explosion. It can be something very minor. You get ahead of it, you work on it, you work with your ostomy nurse on it, figure out tips and tricks. You learn a lot over the years about different, accessories you can use, get samples to deal with it. There's a learning curve, yes, but I'm not sitting on the toilet pooping 40 times a day and pooping blood 40 times a day. I'm not anemic. I enjoy food again. I go swimming again. I can run, I can exercise, I can go on vacations, long flights. Like I have to put out there, I could do none of that before my ostomy, none of that. And, I will also just point out the process of pooping when you have this disease or, even a CRC, from what I understand, it feels like shards on your bottom when you have rectal disease. Living like that, feeling like I couldn't sit or I needed to sit on a heating pad, sometimes on ice, use all these creams on my bottom. You don't think that's maintenance? That's a lot of maintenance right there. So for me, it hasn't been even this mental adjustment to an ostomy. It's been like a welcome change, is what I would say. I never expected it to be like that. I also never expected my reversals to result in so much grief. So when I have been reversed and given the J pouch, I have had separation anxiety from my stoma, from taking care of it. I know people think this is so strange, but really, after my first series of surgeries, when they were taking down the J pouch and reversing the ileostomy, I remember the weeks prior to that talking to my therapist and being like, I'm getting a little anxious. Like, what is it going to be like to poop again from my bottom? Like, what if it doesn't work properly? And, I used to call my stoma my baby at that time. And I named it Snuffleupagus because it kind of, you know what I'm talking about, right? So my husband walked into the hospital room and he was like, oh, because like we were changing the bag and the nurse was showing me. I was in a lot of pain. I had just woken up. And I was like, look, it's Snuffleupagus.
I love that. I love that. So see, and we have to name them too. I think that's an important thing too. A lot of people name them. And it's crazy that you said it's not crazy, but
you had separation anxiety because, again, it's like, how am I going to be in pain sitting on the toilet? Am I going to have to be going to the bathroom 5 million times again? It's almost like you had that PTSD without it, and now, and it's funny that you said your husband walked in and went, oh, because I remember the first time I had to change mine, my husband was in the room and the nurse comes in, she goes, okay, let's change, let me show you how to change a bag. My husband got up and walked out of the room. And I'm sitting there changing the bag. In my head, my first thing went, oh my God, he thinks I'm ugly. He thinks it's going to smell. This is horrible. He laughed. He walked out. That was what was going on in my own head. And I've been with my husband for 22 years now. So it was, and so I had said something to him and he goes, oh my word, no way. I was giving you privacy. It's not like you walk in, I don't take a dump in front of you. You know what I mean? I was just giving you some privacy to get used to whatever this first thing was that you were going through. And so it was like, sometimes it's that story that you tell in your head too, through certain situations. But Tina, you have overcome a lot, and you're putting a lot of yourself out there and having these discussions that are not easy to have, these topics that are not easy to be talked about, and you're talking about them. You're out there publicly talking about them. And I'm so glad you're bringing them up here with us today. Truly. Thank you for that.
No. Thanks for saying that. It really does mean a lot because it's been very hard to talk about, but at the same time, I also realized that the stigma is so great and it's preventing people from living their best lives. It was preventing me from living my best life. And I've seen the other side, and I feel like it's my duty to share the other side. I really do feel like, it took a while for my husband to adjust. I know you were asking about that. He was my boyfriend at the time, but he really didn't have a problem with it. It was more that the culture and the families were saying what our culture was sort of dictating. And in our culture, what happens is usually marriage is of two fit or able-bodied people. This whole concept of interabled marriage or disabled marriage, it exists, but it doesn't. It's just something you don't really talk about. And as a young person talking about my illness and going through so much, I understand the worries too. They're worried that their son might be widowed the way my mom was at a young age. They're worried about, having to be a caregiver for the rest of your life. But at the same time, I think what people don't understand also about marriage is that marriage is not just about physical fitness. It's about being there for each other emotionally, in health and in sickness, like we say. But I feel like in many ways, we can be equal partners in a sense of, okay, maybe I'm not able to cook today because I'm so sick and I can't stand there and cut the vegetables and do this or that. But I can provide him that emotional support, that loving support, be an accepting wife and caring wife in so many ways that I don't think a lot of communities might understand. Marriage is so much more than physical fitness. It's so much more than cooking and cleaning and, bearing children. It's an emotional bond and connection. It's a spiritual connection. And I think that's where societies definitely need to understand that whether it's an interabled marriage, a disabled marriage, whatever it might be, we have to be more accepting and inclusive of people with health challenges. They may not be disabled, but they may have chronic illnesses. We are still worthy of love. We are still able to provide love and support, and oftentimes have even more empathy than people who may not have had a health condition. So I just want to put out there that kind of notion too, Leanne, is that acceptance goes a long way of other people and other communities and of the disabled population.
Yeah, Tina, I'm glad you said that because marriage is a lot more. And I think that everyone, whether you have illness or not, needs to hear those words, right? Needs to understand that stuff because, you fall in love, you fall in love, and it's just, life is going to be great, and you get married. And then when things get tough, what happens, right? What happens to the majority of other people? It's the ones that, stick it out through the tough times, and you're right. It's emotional, it's spiritual, it's all the things. It's all the things. It's your partner for the rest of your life. And that's what it should be. Right. You have shared so much, and I am so, so grateful, Tina, that you came on here to talk to us and share all these, share these stories that, like I had said earlier, aren't talked about, that need to be talked about. I really, really appreciate it. And, as we're coming to a closure of, of this episode of this chat, and I definitely want to have you on again at some point, but what would be the one thing, if you could leave our listeners with one thing, what would that one thing be?
I think the one thing I would say to the listeners today is that, we are so hard on ourselves in so many different ways. That self-talk that we tell ourselves when we're going through these conditions, especially as women, pooping or having these diseases of the colon and rectum, they're not becoming illnesses. They're not easily spoken about when we're dating, when we're getting married, or in relationships in general. I think, it is important to feel out your partner and make sure they understand, what you're going through. That's something that I did early on, is just sort of extend to them that, look, this is an illness. It's for the rest of my life. And, I may have this ostomy for the rest of my life. And have those open conversations with one another. How do you feel about this? What does this look like to you? I think silence really prevents people from having that open communication and understanding within each other and within a relationship. And it allows shame to brew, often unnecessarily. So I think the one thing I want to leave the listeners with today is have open communication. You don't have to tell them every time you take a dump, but that this is what I'm going through. It's been so hard for me. I'm thinking to go down this route, get an ostomy. What are your thoughts? Whatever the conversation might be, it needs to be open and it needs to be empathetic, and recognize that they might not be going through this particular situation themselves, but they're living with us, they're seeing us suffer. And, these loving kinds of open forms of communication can help foster an even stronger relationship. I think there were many times that life got in the way of my relationship, with my husband. And every single time I'll reel things back in, have that open communication, level set, make sure we're on the same page or on a similar page, and then move forward. And I think people often say, how do you make a relationship work when you have all these conditions and an ostomy bag? That's how I make it work. And I think it's important to understand that we also have to give that empathy back to our partners. They're also seeing us suffer, and sometimes it's really hard to see us suffer.
I love that. And I love that that's what you're leaving us with today, because you're so right. You're so right in so many ways. It's my husband working in his office, and as soon as we get up, I'm going to just go give him a hug and thank him for just, sticking by me through everything. Right. And having that appreciation. Tina, thank you again so much. So much for being here with us this week. Truly appreciate you. Truly grateful that I reached out on social and asked you to share your story. And grateful that you said yes.
Absolutely. And, October is ostomy October, hashtag ostomy October. So I absolutely want to make sure that those of you living with ostomies are celebrating. And even if you're not at the point of celebration, that you're coming to a point of accepting. And for those of you who are thinking about an ostomy, I hope you're able to come to a decision that works for you.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I will also, for the listeners, I'm going to be putting Tina's Instagram handle in the show notes as well. So you can connect with her out there on Instagram and head over to her website, Own Your Crohn's, and connect with her there as well. All right, Tina, thank you again so much for being here with us.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining us this week. If you enjoyed this podcast, get the behind the scenes at leannehayden.com/ostomy updates. And also, if you found this episode encouraging, please screenshot it and share it on Instagram. And don't forget to tag me and also the person who was on the episode with me. I occasionally will do special gifts for anyone who does do a screenshot and share it on Instagram or in your stories. Also, lastly, please go to Apple or Google, rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast to keep up with them every single week. I enjoy you guys. Thank you so much for being here.